If I asked you to picture the last thing that you bought, whether that was a recent trip to the grocery store, a cup of coffee, an Amazon order, or whatever else you've decided was worth your money recently, how did you pay for that thing? I'll give you a second to picture it. Because I'm guessing you either used a credit card, maybe your debit card, or potentially you e-transferred or Venmo'd someone your half the bill that they grabbed. But I'm also guessing that what you didn't use was actual cash. And I think this is a pretty fair assumption considering that paying with cash has become less and less common over the past few years. We can see that the number of people using cash for none of their purchases has gone up a lot over the past decade alone, and it's especially high for people earning over $50,000 per year. Now, even if you can't think of the last time that you actually used cash, how would you feel if cash didn't exist anymore? If it just poof, completely vanished and we became a cashless society? It sounds like something that's gonna happen at some point, but should it happen? And are we actually ready for it to happen now? It kind of feels like cash has been around forever, and it really has been a long time. But cash wasn't the first form of money. And in this case, by money, I mean a payment method for goods and services. But before there was cash, we have to go all the way back to 6000 BCE when bartering existed. Now, bartering sounds pretty simple on the surface. You're essentially trading something you have for something you need. A classic example is someone who bakes bread trading with a butcher who has meat. If they swapped, then both parties have bread and meat. Now, there's actually some debate on whether or not it was so direct or if bartering was more community-oriented. Like, hey, I see that you're short on bread, so here's a loaf and I'll grab some meat from you in a few months. Either way, exchanging what you had for what someone else had was pretty clearly the way that people acquired what they needed. The thing about this system is that it was kind of slow. It was a negotiation, so it took time to land on, hey, I'll give you this much bread for exactly this much meat. Or, hey, the quality of what you gave me isn't as good as what I gave you. Basically, it's what we now call inefficient, and we know that capitalism wants to be efficient. So over time, money or cash was born. Apparently in 640 BCE, a mint, or a place where money is created, was opened in China, and the first coins were produced. And coins have really stuck around ever since then. The thing is that coins that were made out of different metals like silver and gold were really heavy to carry a lot of, so different nations worked on alternatives. In 6th century BCE, Rome, France, and Russia supposedly all tried out leather money, where animal hide was fashioned into a currency, and this might actually be why we call a dollar a buck. Ultimately, it was paper money that was created and accepted as the preferable form of currency because of how light it was. It started in 1260 with the Yuan dynasty in China, and eventually paper money started to spread throughout the world. At first, paper currency wasn't tied to anything specific, just its value in metal coins, until the gold standard came into the picture. Gold was officially made the standard of value in England in 1816, and then the Gold Standard Act was signed in the United States in 1900s, coinciding with the creation of the central bank. Now, we know that the gold standard didn't actually last very long historically speaking. It had left the United States by 1971, but cash, so both paper currency and coins, have stuck around. In the last few years, though, we've seen a significant decrease in the use of cash, mostly because of both virtual payments and digital currencies emerging.
Like we said before, capitalism and money are supposed to be about efficiency. And just like how coins were more efficient than bartering, and how paper currency was lighter and easier to use than coins, now we have the ability to swipe a card or click a button, which makes paying for something as efficient as ever. See, credit cards and debit cards came first, but in the 1990s, when the internet and cell phones were surging in popularity, online mobile payments were also created. Now, back in the 90s, all these payment methods were all new, but over the last 20 to 30 years, we can't even imagine not paying for something in this way. What's kind of crazy to think about isn't the fact that people are using these more convenient and efficient payment methods, it's that just by these payment methods existing, people are viewing physical cash in a very different way. Even though physical cash has had such a long history and is very tangible and is an easy way to learn about money, governments and businesses are pushing further and further away from using physical cash at all. The Australian government almost made any cash purchase over $10,000 illegal to cut down on criminal activity and money laundering, but then it was scrapped in 2020 because of pushback. And even if it's legal, people are probably still gonna give you the side eye if you go to make a big purchase and you literally pay for it in $10,000 worth of paper bills. And here's the thing, businesses don't even have to accept cash in the United States and Canada. It's not the law. Now, back in 2019, it was estimated that less than 10% of all the money in the world was in cash, and the other 90% wasn't in physical money. Now, at the time, that 10% represented about 5 trillion US dollars. And since then, especially in 2020, where we saw money being printed at much higher levels than normal, since then, so over the last 4 years, that 5 trillion has grown to 8.3 trillion US dollars across 20 different countries, plus the euro. Physical cash means everything in circulation. So that could be physical money being kept in bank vaults, money in your wallet, money being kept in cash registers. But again, 10% is a pretty small piece of the pie. 90% of the money that's out there is being kept digitally, and some countries are moving more digital than others.
According to the most recent global payments report, globally, cash still makes up about 16% of all payments, but that's expected to drop to 10% by 2026. And Canada is actually one of the countries that's leading the way to becoming an almost fully cashless society. We're expected to have only 3% of point-of-sale transactions to be done in cash by 2025, which would be one of the lowest rates in the world. Right now, Canada's sitting at about 6% of transactions done in cash, and the United States is actually double that, sitting at 12%. Now, part of the reason that Canada's been able to make the switch more quickly is because of Interac Online, which is basically our instant transfer payment system that lets us e-transfer money pretty easily from our bank account apps. Now, even though this system's actually been around for about 20 years now, between 2021 and 2022 alone, this way of sending payments actually grew from 8% to 12% of transactions. In the US, the main systems are Zelle and RTP, but neither of those are being as widely adopted. But apparently this year in 2023, a new system called FedNow is coming out, which is actually created by the Federal Reserve, so we might see that increase the amount of digital payments there too. Something else that I found interesting from the Global Payments Report is that even though there was a ton of information about how all these different countries are using cashless, they still explicitly said that cashless societies aren't imminent, which basically means that we're not going to see cash completely wiped out within the next handful of years. Now, like we said before, there are some different people out there who do want to see cash gone. One of those obviously being online payment companies who make a lot more money if more of our transactions are online instead, so obviously they're pushing for that. And on top of that, there's also the argument that eliminating cash would mean that there would be less robberies for money because people wouldn't have cash on them. There wouldn't be money in their wallets at their homes. There wouldn't be money at the bank anymore, so maybe robberies and crime would go down. But there's also some really strong reasons for why keeping cash around is actually really important. One reason goes back to the classic argument that technology is not actually always the most reliable. Now, we saw an example of this happen just last year when Rogers, which is one of the biggest telecommunications companies in the country, went down for a few hours. Now, you would think that would have just impacted our phones and our internet, but Interac Online actually relies on Rogers to run. So when Rogers was down for hours, it also meant that no one could use their debit cards or send money to each other. Now, something really similar happened with Visa in Europe back in 2018, where they actually had a hardware failure. And again, same thing, people couldn't actually spend any money for hours. But arguably the biggest issue with going cashless is the fact that there are large unbanked and underbanked communities that exist.
According to the World Bank, out of 7.8 billion people in the world, 1.4 billion, or 20%, are unbanked. Unbanked basically means that these people don't have a checking or savings account. Now, there's also another population of people that are underbanked. Now, underbanked means that these people might have a bank account, but they also rely on other financial options like check cashing, money orders, payday loans, all of these things on a regular basis. In the US, 4.5% of people are unbanked, and another 14.1% of people are underbanked. And in Canada, those numbers are similar, with 3% unbanked and 15% underbanked. That's millions and millions of real people under those numbers. A lot of people who are or underbanked rely on physical cash to make their purchases, and by eliminating physical cash completely, they're unable to participate in society with money that they've either earned themselves or that's theirs to spend. And because of this, a lot of stores that are completely cashless are argued against because they can be discriminatory. Now, those stores argue that the solution isn't them accepting cash, it's that the country should focus on making banking, specifically digital banking, more accessible to people. We definitely agree that making non-physical cash and banking in general more accessible is really important, but that's something that takes time. We also thought that this chart looked interesting. So it has data from 2018, but what it shows is how the percentage of people using cash at all increases as their income level decreases, with 43% of Americans being in the two lowest income brackets. So even if there's a lot of people moving away from cash, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that no one's left behind if we are in fact moving into a cashless society in the future. If you want to hear more about how you could be missing out on thousands of dollars by not making one small switch with your money, make sure you check out this video next. And yeah, as usual, we'll see you guys next week. You already know the vibes, and let's go.